welcome to the studio review for chapter 14 on unit testing. We are going to use an object called LaunchCode to set up some properties with certain values, and then to set up a method that's going to accomplish a number of things for us and return a string. And we're not just going to write some tests, we're actually going to practice test-driven development, which means that we write the test first and make sure that test fails, and then go over to where the code is that's being tested and write the piece of code necessary just for that one test to pass. And then you just kind of keep doing that process with each new thing that you add, and you refactor as needed so that all of the tests continue to pass each time you add a new test. And we have some starter code in the JavaScript project's repo. So we'll go to the unit testing directory and to Studio, and then find these files here. And this is going to be one where we need to run npm install, because there is a package.json file that contains the dependencies needed, including jest. So let's take a look at this. The package.json file has, listed that jest is used when we run npm test. And it lists it here as a dependency with a specific version. So we will make sure to take care of that before we get started with our coding. And here it starts to tell us about the different properties that we're going to be adding and how we want to go about, writing tests to make sure that the correct values have been stored. There's a number of instructions here about the launch output method of the object that we'll be writing. And then they're going to have us kind of walk through, all the different tests we're going to write for this until we get to the end. And at the end, we'll, this bonus mission basically just wants us to go back and examine, where do we have repetition in the code? Where are there places where we could actually refactor it to make it more efficient now that we've made it do everything that it's supposed to do? And that's, that's part of the development process. You code things a little bit at a time, you make it work as you go along, and then in the end you re-examine it and decide, is there a way that we can make this code even better? This is very much a normal part of the development process. So this is a good process for us to follow as you learn how to write unit tests. Okay, so let's take a look first at the installation we need to do. You see I'm already in unit testing /studio. And that's where this package.json file is. So I just need to run npm I or install, and we'll watch all of these things being installed. And as soon as they're done, we should have a package lock.json file here and node modules here, which contains the different libraries that are needed, including jest. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the files. We have two files we're going to be working in. The first is index.js. That's where our LaunchCode object is going to be coded. And you can see that they've got this set up to, export it under that name. And then, and now we're in launchcode.test.js, which is here in the test subdirectory. Ordinarily, your test file would be named to match the file that you're testing. They called it index.js and did not call it launchcode.js, but that's okay. It's the only file. It has an object called LaunchCode, and so, it's not hard for us to see that they're connected. Here at the top, they import the LaunchCode object from index, and then we have a describe block to start out here. And all of the tests that we write are going to be inside this big describe block here. Okay, and because we're practicing test-driven development, we are going to start with the tests. So we'll start here. So let's start here and look at organization. This is the first property that we want to add. So inside describe, we need to write a specification just for testing this property. And we'll run it and watch it fail. And then we'll go over to index.js and actually add the property with the value that we're supposed to have, nonprofit, and then run the test again and watch it pass. This is the process. Okay, so let's start here. I'm going to reword this a little bit because I really like to pay attention to how all of the text that you pass into these describe and test blocks actually work together as a sentence. So I'm going to call this the LaunchCode object. And then we could continue that sentence in our first test block and say, should have a property called organization. And that's the rest of the sentence. And define an anonymous function that will hold the code that's to be executed. So we can write our expectation, expect LaunchCode dot organization. Now it doesn't exist yet, but this is what the property is going to be, and this is how we will reference it. We'll go to the LaunchCode object that's been imported and go to the organization property, and we expect that to equal nonprofit specifically. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. Now you can run npm test from here, from this folder, and it will automatically run jest, and it'll show you that it has failed because it's receiving undefined. Right now, it found LaunchCode, but there is no property called organization. So that's correct. We have written the test. We've proven that the test works. It's just failing because the code is not there yet. So now we come over here and we write the code that will satisfy just this test. Now, here's where a lot of people get impatient. And you say, okay, I see that they want organization and executive director and percentage cool employees, and you want to just go at it and knock it out real quick. That's fine. Once you get some experience behind you, maybe you could do a little more of this in blocks. But right now, we really want to be methodical and practice test-driven development by adding just a little bit at a time. So we really are going to write just the test for organization and add organization. And we will just say, yep, we've got an organization, it's called nonprofit, that's the value. So now if we run our test again with npm test here, we can see that it passes, and it says the LaunchCode object should have a property called organization, and it passes. Perfect. All right, let's do it again. And this time they want us to add another property with executive director. We just need to test that that value is Jeff. So I'm going to, inside the same describe block for the object, say I want to test that the LaunchCode object should have a property called executive director. There we go. And we'll give it an anonymous function and say we expect that LaunchCode dot executive director should equal Jeff. Okay. Now here, I can use npm test here, and it's going to run every test it can possibly find. If you ever want to run just a single test, you could use an extension like I have installed here. I've got gotta find it, Jest Runner right here. You can install this in VS Code. You'll have an install button right here where it now says uninstall. And once you've done that, you should see in your Jest files these little hot links, run and debug. And so you have one at the describe block level here, but you also have one on each test. So I can run just this one test by clicking on this button. And you can see that the command that it put here in the console is actually very long because it's specifically going to that path. It's got some flags here and so on and so forth. You wouldn't want to have to type that out, by hand, which is why this extension is so handy to be able to run just what you want to run at any given time. So you can see the result here. It failed the one we just added, which is correct because we have not actually added the executive director property to the code yet. And then it says it skipped the other one for organization. And in the end, you had one failed, one skipped. So that's, something to pay attention to, that if you do run an individual test, you will see it this way. However, one of the things that's really important about this process is that you make sure that new code that you add doesn't break code that you already tested. So it generally is going to be a good idea to always, before you move on, run all of them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come over and just add this to satisfy the test we just wrote. We'll say executive director, and then add Jeff. Okay, and then come back and I'm going to run just this one again and make sure just the one passes. But before I move on, I'm also going to run all of them and say, okay, let's just make sure that everything is passing still. And it is. And of course, these two things didn't interfere with one another, but if we were writing a method and we're refactoring it, you might suddenly find that some of your previous tests are now failing, and that's what we have to be careful of. So that's the process that I'm going to follow here. Let's go over and look at the third one. Percentage cool employees, which of course is 100%, right? It says to give it a value of 100 up here. Okay, so we'll write another test. Should have a property called percentage cool employees. Okay. We'll declare this anonymous function in place to handle the code that needs to be run when the test runs. We'll say we expect launch code dot percentage cool employees to equal. Oh, and it's not a string, it is a number, so 100. Okay, so we can run this individually and see that it fails. So that's good. And now we can test it again after actually updating the code. Percentage cool employees is 100. All right, let's run the test again from here. And it passes. Okay, and now we'll run all the tests. All three are passing. Perfect. All right, the next one is programs offered. And this one's going to be a little bit more complex because we're actually going to have an array that has multiple values in it. And so they actually want us to have 4 expectations within the specification. 3 of them will just check the specific values within the array. And then the final one just wants to check that the entire array is the right size. It should have 3 things in it. So let's go ahead and look up here at what those values are supposed to be. Here we go. Web development, data analysis, and liftoff. Okay, and we can even copy this here and just hold on to that for a second. All right, so we need to write another test. Should have a property called programs offered with 3 programs. And I'm not going to make it any more specific than that because the tests will speak for themselves once we start adding the expectations inside this specification block. Okay, so first we can expect that LaunchCode dot programs offered at index 0. So we have 3 things that are going to be in an array, right? We can expect that that will equal web development. Okay, and then I'm going to do 2 more of these and say that at index 1, we should see data analysis. And at index 2, we should see liftoff. My goodness. Okay, and then the last one is to check the length, right? So expect that LaunchCode dot programs offered dot length should equal 3. Because we'll have 3 things in there. All right, so I'll run the test and watch it fail. And so it says it can't read properties of undefined because there is no array and there's nothing in the array, even if there was. Okay, so let's go correct this and add this in, programs offered, and then I will paste in the array that was provided in the instructions. And so now we have, this property is an array of strings, and we don't want that. Let's see. There we go. And now we can go and test it again. And it should test that all three of these at index 1, 0, 1, and 2 have those values and that the length is 3. And it passes on all 4 expectations. If any one of these was a problem, we would see that it was failing, but all 4 of them are passing. And now I could come up, I can run the entire suite and see that all 4 tests are still passing. Great. All right. So now that we've taken care of all of the regular properties, we're going to add a method. It's going to be called LaunchOutput, and it's going to handle some math for us where we're going to be checking numbers to see if they're divisible by 2, 3, or 5. And depending on which ones are multiples of some of these numbers, we'll have a different combination of LaunchCode and rocks, and we'll have an exclamation point in there. And then eventually we'll handle, what happens if it's not divisible by 2, 3, or 5, and so on. But we really do need to do this a test at a time, and they are going to help us, think this through. So they say to write the first test just to test, what happens when a number that's passed in that's only divisible by 2, and that it will return launch with an exclamation point. Okay, so we will write that test, we'll watch it fail, and then we will go and write the code to add launch output for the first time and make sure that it satisfies this test. But that's all we're going to do. We're not going to worry about any of the other things that it's supposed to do yet. And this is really going to be a great way for you to practice patience and being methodical. So that you can test your code just a tiny, add things a tiny bit at a time and make sure it's still working, no matter how much you change it as you continue to develop this method. All right. So let's do this. Let's think about this for a second. I want to look at this. Right now, we have a single describe block that has so far 4 specifications, 1 for each of the regular properties. What we need to do is write a whole bunch of tests related to one additional property that's a method, right? So what I would like to do is show you how you can group these together so that they all kind of work together and make sense. So I'm going to add a nested describe block that gives me the opportunity to just add a little bit of text here that says, should have a method called launch output, which, and then I'm going to finish setting up the describe block here. And then every single one of the specifications that deals with something more specific than this can now be inside here grouped together. And we have 5 blocks here, 1 for each regular property, 1 for the method. And then all of the tests, all of the test blocks, the specifications that belong just to this will be inside this describe block, nested 1 level down. That's going to help us with reading these messages and make things also a little bit easier to, when we're looking at this thing as a whole, to understand, oh, hey, there's all these other tests, but they all go together because they all have to do with this one thing. So this is just, a way to think about how you organize your tests. When you are working on this professionally and you're in a file where you're really covering a lot of ground, having this level of organization can be really important. All right, so the first one, we just want to test what happens when a number is divisible by 2. Okay, so let's write this first. Now that we've got our nested describe block, I'm going to say launch output should return, and in single quotes, I'll say launch for numbers evenly divisible by 2. Okay. And then create the anonymous function to be executed when the test runs. And then in here, I'm going to write my expectation. I expect LaunchCode dot launch output. That's going to be the method that we add. And then we're going to pass in the number 2 just to test this. And we expect that that's going to be equal to launch when it returns the value when we call this method. Okay, so we can run it. And it says, The LaunchCode object should have a method called LaunchCode output, which should return launch for numbers evenly divisible by 2. So you can see how nicely that reads as one big sentence that makes a whole lot of sense on exactly what it is we're testing. We say that testing is an important form of documentation. This kind of thing helps to have it organized this way, because you can see that as a full sentence and say, okay, this is the one that's failing. This is exactly what we need to, work on. So we'll go and we'll add the code that'll make this pass. And I'm going to lower this just a little bit. Okay, let's head back over to index.js and add our method. So here, I'm just going to add this launch output. That's what we want to use as essentially our alias to represent this anonymous function. That's what we actually will call, but we want to make sure we can pass in a number. So we're going to give it a parameter there. So all we'll have to write here is something like if num mod 2 is equal to 0. So if we divide by 2 and the remainder is 0, then we can return launch. Okay, this is not probably what this code is going to look like by the time we're done, but this satisfies the test for now, and that's all we're interested in. So let's run the test again. Come back over here. I will run just this one. And it says that it still fails. Okay, so let's see what the problem is. Oh, I have a typo. Let's just say launch output. Okay, let's run it again. There we go, and it passes. So the LaunchCode object should have a method called launch output, which should return launch for numbers evenly divisible by 2. It passes. Perfect. You can also see how nice it is that this output, how it groups it together for us like this. So it's going to, have this middle portion, and then all the tests related to it will be listed underneath here. That's pretty nice. Okay, let's do the next one. The next two tests are for numbers that are divisible by 3 and numbers that are divisible by 5. We should have code exclamation point for 3 and rocks exclamation point for 5. Okay, so let's write the next test. It's going to be very similar to this. So I'm actually just going to copy this down and then edit it a little bit and say it should return code for numbers evenly divisible by 3. And so we expect that when we call launch output on the LaunchCode object and pass in the number 3, it's going to equal code. All right. And right now, of course, that's going to fail because the only thing that's returning is launch. Otherwise, it's not returning anything. It's undefined. So we could say, else if num is num mod 3 is equal to 0. Return code. Okay, we'll go back and watch it pass. And it passes. Great. And if we run the entire thing, they all pass. Good. And really, I could just run it from here because we have a way to group these together and run these, and they're the only ones that would be affected by it. So I could run it from here. That's probably what I'll do in the future. Okay, so it's passing now. So we'll add the next one. And again, I'm just going to copy it down. Should return rocks for numbers evenly divisible by 5. And we'll expect that when we call launch output on LaunchCode and pass in the number 5, that it will return rocks with an exclamation point. Okay, this will fail. We will go over here and add another couple lines here. I'm going to just copy that down. Let's say else if the number is divisible by 5, return rocks. Okay, we'll run this again. It passes. Let's run the whole group of tests related to this method, and all 3 of them pass. Good. Okay, so we're well on our way. This is good. For code that to pass the new test, it's talking about these tests that lines out up here, where we should be paying attention to what happens when we have combinations of these. So numbers that are divisible by 2 and 3, 3 and 5, 2 and 5, and then 2, 3, and 5. So we're going to make sure that our code is producing slightly different things depending on which combination of these, we have a number that is a multiple of these things. So we'll come back over and write each of these tests and, keep checking that output after we add the code that passes the tests. And this is where it starts to get really important that we run all of the tests related to launch output and not just the one we're working on, because we're going to start making changes to the code that are going to affect all of the tests. Okay. So let's go ahead and add the next test. And I'm going to just, say the test should return, and we need to double check. I'm going to need to refer to this and make sure. LaunchCode, exclamation point, when a number is divisible by both 2 and 3. Okay. Just like that. And I'll say by both 2 and 3. Okay. So we should test this with the number 6. That's the lowest number that is divisible evenly by both 2 and 3. And we'll say LaunchCode. Okay. So of course, this is going to fail for right now because we're only handling these things individually. And while we could continue to add more, else if things here, you might notice that when you have something that's evenly divisible by 2 and 3, these words can kind of go together, right? LaunchCode. The only problem is the exclamation point. So we're going to need to figure that out. What I'm going to suggest is that we use a string building approach. And we actually start with something like, let result equal and have an empty string. And then instead of returning things, at different points here, we just have one return statement at the very end that says return result. And then here, we're going to, just add to result instead. We'll use this approach of building a string. So I can do this and say, result plus equals. I'll just be consistent with all of them because we're going to keep trying different combinations of this. But if we do it this way, we can say, okay, if it's divisible evenly by 2, we want to add launch to this string. And then if it's divisible by 3, we want to add code to this string. The one issue, again, is this exclamation point. So what we're going to need to do is take the exclamation point off of these 3 so that we can combine them how we want. And then we could do something like return result plus, exclamation point at the end. So let's try this and see how this works so far just to pass the test that we just wrote. I think it's going to work for this. We might have to change it again in the future. Yeah, it's still failing. So let's see what came out. Expected launch code. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah, the other problem that we have, and this is why we have tests that make sure, keep us honest, is these are still mutually exclusive, right? If, else, if. So the way, if we want these to be able to be additive and consider each one on its own merit, we have to separate them out into separate if statements. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to make it where it will definitely evaluate each one of these so that even if this one is true and it, takes care of executing this code, it can still evaluate these again, on their own. So let's try that again. All right, now it passes. Now I'm going to come up to the describe block for launch output, and I'm going to run all of them. And they're all still passing. So, we wrote this in a way, we refactored it so that no matter whether we're doing just a single one of them, or if we're doing one that combines them, we still get the exclamation point on the end and they still come out correctly. All right, that's important. But now we're in a good position to satisfy the next test because we're going to do something very similar. We want 3 and 5 to return code rocks, and we want 2 and 5 to return launch rocks. Now, one thing that is different about these, you'll notice there's a space, right? We're going to need to be able to deal with, when do we add a space and when don't we, right? So let's come over and do just this next one, 3 and 5, to try to get code space rocks, exclamation point. Okay, I'll write the test first. Okay, and it should return code rocks for numbers evenly divisible by both 3 and 5. And so we will put in the number 15 as a test and then check for code rocks. All right. Now, it's going to fail because it's going to say, I got code rocks, but I did not get, it doesn't have the space. That's what we need to fix. So now we're going to have to modify the code again and, decide how to handle that. I would say that what we could maybe do is just say that if we get to here and let's see, we'd have to do it before this. Let's say that we can do another little bit of logic that says if result.length is equal to 0. So if we get to this point, nope, we need to say if it's not equal to 0. If we get to this point where it evaluates, and this is true, but it already has added something before that, then we need to make sure to add a space in. And then we can go ahead and let it add rocks after that. But if it gets to this point and 5 is the only thing that's divisible, that means this will not get added because we've put this extra logic in place, this extra check. All right, let's try it out. I'm going to run just this one. And it fails. Let me see what I did. Code rocks. Did I not do a plus equals? I did not do the plus equals. All right. This is why we have tests, guys. So result plus equals space. All right. And seriously, I mean, I'm not meaning to make these mistakes, but I am. And this is what happens. When you're working on this, it's very easy to make small mistakes. Having this testing process is what helps you prevent from breaking all of the good work you've already done when you're trying to make changes, because it's so easy to do something little that's wrong like that. So now that I realize what happened, like I ended up overwriting whatever was added before the code. I said, oh, I was setting it equal to space instead of just adding a space to what had already been added. So we're good now. We should be able to run this and be fine. There we go. So I'll run the whole group here. Yeah, everything is still passing. All of the tests that we've written for this. Great. Let's do the next one. We want to combine, we want to say launch rocks if numbers are divisible by both 2 and 5, but not 3. So we'll test 10 for this one and make sure it comes out to launch rocks with the space. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is going to pass because we've already taken care of exactly what's needed. It's the same exact thing. If it comes in here and it's not divisible by 2, it'll do this one and it'll add code. And then it comes here and says, oh, it's also divisible by 5. And because the length is not 0, it's going to add the space and then add on rocks and then the exclamation point. So this one passes. We're good. All right. Now, if we have a number that's divisible by 2, 3, and 5, it should say LaunchCode rocks. I'm pretty sure we're good to go on this one as well, because we are only adding the space when we get to the point of considering whether we're adding rocks. So these two should still concatenate without a space on their own. But let's go write the test and we'll see. All right. I'll copy this down. Should return launch code rocks for numbers evenly divisible by, I'll take off the both and say 2, 3, and 5. And then we will test 30, which is divisible by all 3, and say, should equal launch code rocks. All right, let's run it. And it passes. Of course it does. Our code still works. We separated these out. It's going to catch all 3 of them. Launch code, add a space, add rocks, add exclamation point. Okay. Good. We have one more test here in this list that we need to work on. We need to have kind of a final condition so that if we get to the end and the number was not divisible by any of those, we can say, oh, that didn't work. Rutabagas, that doesn't work, and return a different string instead of just an empty string, which is what's happening right now. So let's come over and write the test for that. So it should return, and I need to get this copied here. I'm just gonna paste this in. Rutabagas, that doesn't work. For numbers not evenly divisible by 2, 3, or 5. And then let's just test out 7. That's a good low prime number that's not divisible by any of those 3. And then we will just, paste this same expression in here. Okay. So we're going to run this, and it's going to fail because it's going to be trying to compare just that exclamation point to that expression. So it took the initial result, and the only thing it added on here was the exclamation point. So that actually brings up a good point. It's not as much as us just checking to see if the string is still empty. We have to make sure we're not adding on this exclamation point too, right? So why don't we go ahead and have a little bit more logic that says, if result.length is equal to 0 at this point, when we have just evaluated for LaunchCode and rocks, then we're going to return, rutabagas. That doesn't work. Else, if it does actually have a length, we'll take whatever's there, and we'll just add that exclamation point on and return that instead. Okay, so now we have 2 different possibilities to return at the end. Let's run this. And it passes. Okay, let's run the whole thing. Make sure that all of the aspects are covered. Yeah, 8 passing, good. So all of these cases are now covered by the code we've written. That's good. If we get down here though, you're going to find out they're going to actually provide you with a little bit of a twist. You've got a new condition. They want you to make sure that if a number is divisible by both 2 and 5, instead of returning launch rocks, which makes no sense, they want you to provide a little bit of extra test here, this, extra crash. So we can do that. Let's write I'm actually going to copy this entire thing so we can test that. And we'll write the test first, of course. And actually, we don't need to write a new test. What we need to do is modify this test, because it actually is a test we've already written if it's evenly divisible by both 2 and 5, but not 3. So we're just updating this test to say, okay, now we expect this additional text right here to be part of this. So I'm going to just add that in, and we can test this again. So if I run just this test, it's going to fail now because we're still just returning launch rocks. We need to add this extra bit in. So instead of returning result plus exclamation point, we're not ready to return now. So I'm just going to say, let's just take the result and add on the exclamation point, and then we will evaluate it at that point. Say if a result equals, and we'll just check for launch rocks exclamation point. And if it does, we'll say result now also needs to tack on, oops, let me put that in quotes. There we go. We'll add that on even further and then return result. Okay. So this code's starting to get a little more complex. Let's go test this and make sure it works. We were testing, let's see, this one right here. But really, I need to test all of them now because I've added code that could affect other things. Yeah, okay. So everything's passing now. It is, definitely adding this on only when it's launch rocks at the very end there. Okay, good. So the bonus mission here is to dry the code, see if there's a way that we could reduce some repetition in the code by maybe adding some arrays or objects or loops to see how we might make it a little bit less repetitive. So I'm going to come over here to this, and we'll take a look at this here. In looking at this, I would say probably the place where I see some repetition where things could be looped over and consolidated a little bit might be the way we're doing this logic, where we're checking different numbers and adding different text. And there's a direct correlation here between, 2 and launch, 3 and code, and 5 and rocks. And when we have that kind of correlation, two pieces of information that need to be linked together, and we want to be able to reference that and access it, a JavaScript object is a really good way to store that information. So I'm going to come up to the very top here, and I'm going to say, let's just have something called parts, the parts of the word that we want to put together, the phrase that we're building. And we will give it 3 keys, 2, that is launch, and 3, that is code, and 5, that has the value rocks. Okay. And now we can take this whole section right here and just loop over this. And you may remember from learning about objects that there is this thing called a for in loop that lets us just refer to these with a variable name and just look at them one at a time, and it goes through the key value pairs. So let's take a look at that. We could say for let modulus in parts. And the modulus is going to be either 2, 3, or 5. The operator itself is called a modulo. So I'm going to use this term to refer to the 2, the 3, and the 5. So we'll look at each one of these keys, the modulus, in this object parts, and let it take them one at a time. And I've got a typo here, so let me fix that. I need a comma. And we'll say, essentially do what this does. So I could move this up now like this and just say if num mod modulus is equal to 0, whichever modulus it is, then just go and return parts at that modulus. Just go look it up. What is the value for that modulus? And that's the string that we want to add to the result if we get here. That will work for 2 and for 3 just fine, but we do remember that with 5 here, we also have this additional logic that we need to add in just so we can get that space in there. So I'm going to take that and just set that in here right after this, and then we have to specify that the only time we're interested in checking this is when the modulus, is when the modulus is 5. So we'll say when the modulus is 5 and the result is length is not 0, that means we already have launch and or code added in, then we want to make sure that space is there. Okay. Then we can move on and add, the rocks if this is a 5. But that way it'll only run this check when it does get to 5, and then it'll only add it if something already exists. Okay, so I can get rid of this now. And we essentially have managed then to take care of all 3 of these parts, to combine these in whatever combination they're supposed to be. And then we could just do the last bit of saying, okay, is there something there? Did any of those 3 trigger something? And if not, we're just going to return this instead. But if it did, let's add that exclamation point on. If it's launch rocks, we're going to add on the crash. And then whatever that final result is, we will return it. Okay. So let's go ahead and run our tests and make sure that they still pass. We want all of them to pass. Because we made changes to the code and it looks like we have an error. Something's not working. So let's check it out. Yeah, it didn't catch that it was supposed to be adding that space. So let's go back and look and see what we did there. Okay. If the modulus is 5, yeah, okay, this is tricky. So we're establishing here that we want to evaluate if modulus is equal to 5. Here's the interesting thing about these equality operators. You may recall that in JavaScript, triple equals is strict equality. That means that we're expecting a number here. You also might look up here and say, hey, didn't you set that up as a number? Well, I did, But JavaScript doesn't store it that way. It actually stores it as a string, which means when I'm going and checking this here to see if it's 5, it's looking for a number. I need to make this loosely equal and just check to make sure that it is not going to pay attention to the type. It's just going to say, okay, number or string doesn't matter as long as it's 5. This should then be true. So I think we run this now, we're going to find that it's going to pass because now we are not requiring it to be a number. We're accepting the fact that that key is actually going to be a string because that's the way that JavaScript stores keys in objects. Let's run it again. Good, all of them pass. Okay. And we really can run at this point all of the tests from the main describe block that includes the properties and see all those pretty green checks. That's what we like to see. 12 tests we wrote and they all pass. All right, that is the studio. I hope this was helpful for you. I will see you in the next one.